Hello again, I'm Tripp Rogers, and this is Tripp's Take. Well, the Oscar nominations have come out. They were released on the 25th of January in the morning. And again, it's kind of an exercise in futility for someone like me who hasn't seen probably 80% of the films that have been nominated. But I have seen a couple of movies, and I want to talk about them. First off, one that did get nominations, A Complete Unknown about Bob Dylan. That was the Bob Dylan biopic. Best Picture, Best Director. Of course, the director also did Johnny Cash's Walk the Line, which was a huge Oscar winner a few years ago, James Mangold. Also, Timothy Chalamet, Best Actor. Best Supporting Actor, Edward Norton for playing Pete Seeger in that movie. And then Monica Barbiero, who played Joan Baez in the movie. And again, I've talked about it here on Tripp's Take. What a great movie. I do recommend it. If you're a music fan, you got to see it. Because, again, whether you like Bob Dylan or not, the movie is about a certain time. And, as I explained to Sandy and I talk about this, and she's not as much of a music buff as I am. And one of the things I explained to her was Bob Dylan was a product of the time of the 1960s. And when he stepped in, Bob Dylan, when he stepped into the forefront, the folk movement was really big in New York City. And you had a number of groups that, played folk music. And the Newport Folk Festival was a highlight every year in New York. And that was one of the ways that folk music really presented itself. And of course, that was the time when Peter, Paul, and Mary were very popular. And Joan Baez got her first notoriety. Pete Seeger got some notoriety too. Woody Guthrie, of course, was a folk music. And Woody Guthrie, of course, was having some issues at that point in his life. And Bob Dylan stepped into this and, became this folk legend. And the price of fame, though, cost him. And Dylan then, of course, switched from folk music to electric. And that created a huge, huge issue among the folk community. Of course, Bob Dylan's career, you haven't looked back. As they noted in the movie, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for his music. And not many people get that. And Bob Dylan is a cultural icon, and his songs have become the soundtrack to the civil rights movement of and the anti-war protest movement of the 1960s, and rightfully so. And the movie deals with that time, and I got to tell you, like I said, it's a tour de force. And if you get a chance to see it, please do so. And these Academy Award nominations are definitely worthy. Now, I'm going to flip it around to a movie that did not get any nominations, but I thoroughly enjoyed. Now, you've got to, and Sandy thoroughly enjoyed it too. You have to remember that we are students of radio and television. We have worked in some form of radio and television broadcasting most of our lives. I mean, I've been in radio, but I've also done TV on a couple of occasions. In fact, my first real internship was at a cable TV station. And so I know what goes in behind the scenes of a broadcast. September 5 is a movie about ABC Sports coverage of the Munich Olympic Massacre in 1972. And I had a chance to see it. I got an invite at the last minute to a screening online last week. And so I said to Sandy, hey, we could watch this tonight. And she saw the whole movie. I was delayed joining it, but what I watched about the last hour, and I got to tell you, it was really fascinating. Again, as a student of broadcasting, as someone who grew up, I remember that day. I remember watching the TV on September 5th, 1972, watching the coverage. And this movie hits all the notes properly. Again, part of it is a lot of the principals have passed away. It centers around Jeff Mason, who is still alive, and he was a producer for ABC Sports. And the other thing I thought was really good is they didn't get someone to play Jim McKay. They used Jim McKay's actual on-air footage, which has been saved all these years. And I thought it really gave an air of authenticity to this movies. Now, there have been other movies made about the Munich massacre, and they did use Jim McKay's reports and his reporting and ABC Sports reporting. But this movie really tells you the behind the scenes. And again, to put it in perspective, back in 1972, watching things live from another country, from Europe or overseas, was relatively new. There weren't too many satellites. It's not like today where everything is beamed via satellite. Back then there were only a couple satellites. You had to book satellite time. And that was the dilemma that ABC had, because they booked satellite time. They had the satellite time for their broadcast, and they would do a somewhat live broadcast of the Olympics at night. It wasn't like today where the Olympics are on, basically from early morning until late at night. And again, depending on the time zone, they could be doing it any other time. And there's all kinds of satellite feeds. Back then, you just had kind of one satellite, and this was it. And you booked time to do it. And that's what ABC ran into, because when they had this event happen, they had to share the satellite with CBS and NBC. And that's one of the key moments, is that they were covering this supposed storming of the hotel, of the rooms where the hostages were being held, and they were going off the air because they did not have the feed, and they did not have the satellite time book. So, and nobody wanted to share it too. So, I mean, it was a cutthroat business. I mean, back then, network television was three. It was ABC, NBC, and CBS. I mean, that was it. And it was very cutthroat. So this movie really deals with that. And if you are a student of broadcasting, or have any note or want to see what goes on behind the scenes, this is as real gets. You're covering an event live. This had not been done. Again, it's hard to think about this because, CNN in 1980 and satellite TV changed everything, but back in the 60s, back in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, this was a new thing. And to see something live was unreal. I mean, that's one of the big bugaboos I have with the movie Ford versus Ferrari, because they played it as if they had live TV coverage of Le Mans, which did not happen. And they also portrayed that they had live radio coverage of these races. Did not happen. There was only one race that was broadcast live back in the 60s. It was the Indianapolis 500. That was it. So again, that's one of the things, or one of the issues I have with some of these movies. But again, they're playing with things. I mean, what are you going to do? Can I say? But again, I invite you to see this movie if you can. I think one of the things that bothers me about this movie is the fact that, here we are in Savannah, Georgia. And Savannah, Georgia, we have a 10-plex, another 10-plex. We have two 10-plexes. And then in Pooler, we have another 20 screens, I think. Nobody has this movie in their theaters. Nobody booked it. And that bothers me, because this is a movie I'd love to see on a big screen. But the biggest screen I'll have to deal with is my television screen. And it was okay. It was great to see it. And actually, we watched it off my iPad, so we didn't really get the full effect. Sandy and I have said when it does come on, and it was a Paramount movie, so probably will be on Paramount Plus at some point in the near future, we have to sit down and watch it, because that's how good the movie was. It really was. Peter Sarsgaard is probably the best known actor who is in this movie, and he plays Rune Arledge. But I recommend this wholeheartedly. And for those of you who grew up and remember the Munich massacre, the Munich Olympics in 1972, or like I say, I remember watching it. And the other thing that was so interesting about this movie, and it's a story that's been portrayed and been talked about over the years. ABC was very, very, attuned to the fact that David Berger, an American resident who emigrated to Israel and was one of the hostages, his family was watching in the United States. And this is how they were getting information. They were very careful to not say anything that would cause them stress. They knew they had a very important thing. They were telling them whether their son was alive or dead. And that was not something they took lightly. Like I say, you get a chance, see the movie. That is Tripp's Take for January the 23rd, 2025. I can't believe we're already into 2025. If you got any comments or questions about my podcast, all you got to do is you can email trippstake@gmail.com. The Hall of Famer Mike Scheck and yours truly, the Fantasy Sultans, taking a break since the season is over. We'll have another show coming up before the Super Bowl as we kind of wrap up 2024 and start set you up for 2025, which, fantasy football season will be here before we know it. Fantasy Sultans, you can find our podcast on Spotify for Creators. I got to keep remembering they changed that name. And YouTube, just search for the Fantasy Sultans. Also, Sunday with the Fantasy Sultans is broadcast on New Jersey radio stations, Fox Sports New Jersey in Central Jersey, Fox Sports Jersey Shore down by the Jersey Shore. And let's not forget, FoxSportsNewJersey.com show is on every Sunday morning Sunday at 12 noon. That kind of leads you into the game, and we continue to do the show every week. If you like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, give a listen to WTRSradio.com. That plays great music 24/7. And that's going to do it for this edition of Tripp's Take. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For now, Tripp Rogers. Make it a great one.